Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Think with a Drink. This is the weekly webinar series brought to you by the Aries Foundation for Financial Education. And tonight's presentation is the Panini Generation, or how the sandwich generation is getting squeezed even harder than previously had been. A couple of things before we get started here. First one, just know the event is being recorded, but you don't have to worry about whether your image or anything is on the screen because only what's being shown is being recorded. So all the microphones should be kept muted. The cameras, it doesn't matter because, again, it's not being shown. There is, however, a chat box, which we encourage you to use should you have any questions. And my co-pilot, who I'll introduce in a second, is here to keep me on pace and answer any questions that might come up on the chat box. Speaking of your pilots for tonight's journey, my name is Tom Alessi. I'm the president of the Aries Foundation. I have been in financial services for more than 23 years. I'm an investment advisor. That means I act as a fiduciary whenever dealing or giving advice to my clients. I want to bring my co-president, my vice president, Craig, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Craig Richardson. I'm the vice president of the Aries Foundation. I've been doing financial services a little over 18 years now, and I work with families to help them find a better future with their money.
And so, as I said, Craig is going to be chiming in as we go along, but he's here also to make sure that if any questions pop up in the chat box, that we can get those answered. I told you that Think with a Drink is sponsored by the Aries Foundation for Financial Education. You can check us out. Our website is www.ariesfoundation.org. And the mission behind Aries is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. Because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with your money. And just like every other personal relationship that you might have, there are behaviors and emotional triggers that occur to cause us to act sometimes irrationally when it comes to handling our money and our finances. All Craig and I and the rest of the Aries team try to do is help you be a little bit more understanding of that, the reasons behind why, and try to take some of those emotions out of those dealings. All right, disclosures, I'm not going to read all of this. Just know we're a nonprofit organization. We do this for educational and informational reasons only. We at Aries recommend that if you ever have any questions, be them tax, legal, or financial, that you seek out the help of a professional to get those questions answered. Now, usually this is the fun part of the evening when we come to, hey, it's Think with a Drink. And the reason we call it Think with a Drink is that we know some of this information can be a little bit daunting, can be a little challenging, and sometimes can be, feel like, well, wait, I don't have a handle on this. So all Craig and I try to do is make it more casual, more relaxed. And generally, we can only think of one way to do that is if we have something nice and cold to imbibe on. Unfortunately for me, I have been under the weather here for the last couple of days. So I am having a glass or a cup of tea to go with my presentation tonight because it's the only thing I can really do that's going to keep me going through this presentation. Craig, what are you drinking this evening?
Well, whiskey. Don't you drink whiskey when you have a cold?
You know what? I didn't have any. That was I didn't go out. I thought about it, to be honest with you. I'm like, I should just go out and get a little thing of whiskey. That'll be good for me in terms of dealing with it. And then I'm like, that means I have to go outside. I don't want to go outside. So I didn't do it. I chickened out.
Well, I'm enjoying a little bit. I'm just having a Diet Coke tonight because I actually did a little imbibing this afternoon at Greater Good. So I had their Pilsner, which was fantastic. So
nice. See, well, you got it in anyway. But anyway, that's the idea behind Think with a Drink. So we just say, hopefully you can pour yourself a glass of something that makes you feel good and join us along. And I'll say skål, even though it's tea.
Oh, and you have the Christmas cup, even better.
Yes. What should that be? Cheerio or something like that?
You have Cheerios in there?
Yeah, I know. All right. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to go through and explain the sandwich generation. Why we call it a panini, why in some cases it's starting to look more like a club sandwich than actually just a regular sandwich, the implications of the stresses that go along with it, and ways or things that you can do to try to overcome or adapt to some of this. And then, as always, we leave time for some Q&A. All right, so, a brief history of the sandwich generation. I think I spelled that wrong, but that's okay. It happens there in terms of going through it. So realize that 50% of the adults who are aged right now 40 to 60, basically that 20-year window, 50% of them are in a situation where they are caring for a parent and the child at the same time. Think about that. That's 50% of the population. And as we know, because the silver tsunami is moving, that the baby boom generation by 2030 will all be over age 65 in the year 2030. This number is only going to get larger, and with everything that's been going on recently, you have more and more young adults coming back to the nest, right, Craig, that idea?
Well, absolutely. I mean, where it used to be, you graduate high school and go get a job, or you go to college and then go get a job. You're seeing a lot of people will go to college and then come back home and look for a job for 2 or 3 years, right? So people aren't moving out necessarily, until they're in their mid-20s.
Right. And so that's sort of what went on with it. And, the reality of it is that today, when you look at that extended number, right, that's there, essentially what it says is that 50% of those sandwich generation households, report that they are providing aid to an adult child, right? 27% of them acknowledge that they remain like a almost primary source for that over 18-year-old. And then when you factor in the parents, 21% of them are providing some form of aid or financial assistance to their at least one parent over the age of 65. Right. And we run into this a lot, Craig, because we were, and this is kind of the reason we brought this up and, decided to go through this, because we always ask the question, are you considering or thinking about a parent and having to help or care for them later on?
Right. I think a little bit of this financial support is coming into play more so now than ever before, because earnings haven't kept up with the cost of living. Right. Cost of living just keeps increasing, and your just wages aren't increasing at the same rate. And so for those kids just starting out, if you're making that $25,000-$30,000 a year, it's very, very difficult to live on your own, and with that type of income. So you're finding that they're needing a little more support. On the other end, someone who's been retired for a while, they may have planned for retirement, but didn't expect they were going to live as long as they are. And once again, if they don't have a cost of living adjustment other than just from Social Security, all of a sudden your cost of living is increasing faster, than your income. So you're in that little dip. So that's the reality of what's going on in those income situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things about taking it. And so then the question becomes, why do we call it the Panini generation, right? What's it about, the idea behind the Panini part of this and going through it? And so for my end of it, that I am a full-blooded Italian. I lost the screen again. Happens to me every now and then. But the reality is this generation, this version of the sandwich generation is being squeezed from all sorts of different directions, more so than any other generation. So it truly is the sandwich getting squeezed. And, along with that, there are some very hard choices when it comes to trying to balance out work and life, right? Because, a lot of the individuals, when we're talking about these families, and remember, we're talking about those 40 to 60-year-olds, they're still working full time when they're trying to maintain taking care of the children, whether they are young children or now adult children, and then also trying to take care of their parents as well.
I think
Go ahead.
the other thing, Tom, is, the space, our parents started having kids earlier than we did, right? I mean, I didn't start having children until I was 30, right? My parents had me in their early 20s.
Right.
So there's a big difference in that 8 years. By the time I was the same age I am, my father was the same age I am now, I was out and married and gone.
Yeah.
My kids would just start, getting themselves through college. So it pushes everything up a little bit.
Right. And it's a good point that that's part of it. And one of the surveys showed that the sandwich generation, they said it was about a third, about 1/3 said that they've made financial sacrifices, due to caretaking. whether it was for the children or for the adult or both, and that, that essentially that they end up costing themselves somewhere around on an average of about $10,000 a year in working hours and the expenses that get taken on because of that. And so it is a difficult thing to try to balance between the two. Like I've got my job, I've got my life, but I've also got this other responsibility I'm now trying to take care of.
I'm one of those people, Tom. Like I have in-laws that, I'm over there all the time. I'm snow blowing, I'm taking care of the yard, I'm fixing stuff in the house, driving them to this place and that place, so it's, but at the same time have that child still in high school. So it's, feeling that pain.
Yeah, you're right there. That's it. But so one of the things, and we'll bring this up again towards the end about, the idea of the caregiver, and the caregiver is giving care to everybody else except for themselves, right? So health concerns, because you get stretched in so many different ways and so many different priorities, you tend to neglect your own self-care. Putting aside things for yourself, whether that's doctor's appointments or, skipping out on home cooked meals because it's easier just to grab something for takeout, or, not doing whatever, the exercise or things like that. And what ends up happening is, well, okay, it's satisfying. I'm taking care of the today, but in the long term, it can lead to, much more substantial or pervasive problems, that can come up, whether there are other health factors or other types of diseases that go along with that type of behavior.
It's also, not just the physical health, it's also the mental health aspect of, constantly being under stress, the burden on the relationships, because sometimes, when you have to care for somebody a lot, you can create, animosity towards that person.
Right.
You now feel guilty about. So it's all kinds of reasons that, having to give that much care can cause a lot of strife for the caregiver.
Yeah. And so it's important to be thinking about that. I mean, that's one of the things here that, and we'll talk about it a little more in another slide about, setting time for yourself, thinking about yourself in terms of doing it. Right now, this is just sort of the reasons behind the Panini part of this. And you know what? The pandemic, it's only made it worse, right? First off, everybody got put into a weird position just to begin with once coronavirus hit, and we shut down and everything else that went on. And so for those who were already in sort of those stressed or intense situations, they just got stretched even more, right? You even had more sort of pressure going on. And, nowadays, let's face it, like Craig talked about, stuff is more expensive now. You just had the inflation spike. You got increased medical costs and expenses that go along with it. And in some cases, just for that peace of mind thing, like unable to travel, right? Just because of the costs now.
Another thing that happened too, Tom, it kind of reminds me of Indiana Jones, right? Where they're looking for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And the knight in the tomb says, you chose poorly or you chose wisely, right? Who did you get stuck with for Corona? And did you choose wisely or did you choose poorly? And that's causing a lot of stress too. Yeah.
It is one of those things though that it's piled on to it, right? That's part of the squeezing, the pressure thing here, that it just made it feel that much worse, that much more intolerable and harder to bear right now. And we mentioned about the idea of the double-decker, right? I think I mentioned this as like a club sandwich type of thing, right? So it's the, it's almost like a triple-decker version here. So it's now older parents dealing with adult children who have grandkids, but actually their parents are still alive because we're living out into our 90s and in that range, right? So you're dealing with now multi-generation families, and the burden sort of becomes twofold on those that middle of the two there, not the young kids, the grandkids, and not on not the old great grandparents, but the two generations in between there.
Because there's just not enough ice anymore. When you can't chew leather anymore, you should just put them out on the ice.
Yeah,
there's not enough ice in a polar cap anymore because of global warming. So
that just doesn't work now. So just realizing It just, again, it's piling on and adding more and more to what's there. So we come to the halfway point of this and what we're going through. And, so we always say that if you're not sure about your situation, schedule a time with us. You can see that's the calendar link on it. I know at some point Craig will drop it in. You can just schedule a time. We're happy to have a conversation if you're interested in meeting with us, or just to chat and just go over your situation. But it's now like, so what can you do? Well, the first thing that Craig and I will say to everybody is to talk about setting goals. And goals are extremely important, whether we're talking financial, whether we're talking about life, whether we're talking about work, whatever it might be. But having goals is very important, and setting them correctly is even, that's the whole part of it. Because the goal without a plan is just hope, right, Craig? And then, hope is nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you want to achieve something, you got to know what ultimately it is you want the end result to look like. And what is that goal? Is it to help your parents get care? Is it to help your child become independent? And how do you measure that?
Right. And then you want to set them up in increments so it makes them easy to achieve. So we're not trying to shoot everything all at one time, because you're never going to solve it that way. These are little steps that build incrementally to get you to that point. But that's part of the idea of it. You want to have them be actionable, you want to have them be measurable, and you want to have them be achievable so that you can build towards further goals down the road. And because it's Craig and I, we will always come back to that B word. And it's not so much the budget, it's about where you're spending your money. Because ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. It all comes down to where you're spending your money. And we don't care where you spend your money. It's just to understand that, especially if you're in this situation where we're talking about trying to, whether it's save for college and pay for other expenses and deal with stuff and your own retirement and everything else, you need to have a handle on where the money's being spent. Because until you have a handle on where the money's being spent, you really can't be doing anything else, right, Greg?
Well, you're right. And like you said, being that Panini generation, you're stuck with a stressor that you weren't expecting. I mean, when you're raising children, you have expenses. Obviously, we talk about that quite a bit, and how much it costs to raise somebody all the way up to age 18. The problem, though, when someone comes back from school and you're still supporting them, is you're not now supporting a child, you're supporting an adult with all the necessities that an adult has, right? Whether that's a vehicle, insurance, medical costs, all the things that go into supporting an adult. What's that?
Cell phone.
Cell phone, right. So even, so that's something, people don't think about. I'm now supporting an adult, not a child. And then at the same time, like you said, you're getting squeezed where your family may need some either physical help or sometimes even financial help, that your parents or grandparents may need to stay, keep their situation afloat. So
Right.
That's all things that are going to pull from your original budget that you weren't planning for.
Right, that you didn't have accounted for. And that's why you need to know what it is you're spending.
Right.
And when you get a handle on that, it really doesn't, you're just going to flounder. You're really not going to have an actionable plan without it. So that's generally where Craig and I start with everybody, is trying to get a handle on where you're spending your money. Again, we'll try to uncover the whys behind it and why you're doing it and what emotional attachment you have to some of it, which is fine. Like in some cases, we know it makes us feel good. That's why we want to do it. But in the long grand scheme of everything, sometimes you got to get a handle on that and try to curb back some of that spending. So what else can you do? Well, you know what? Your employer can help, right? So if you work for a company that, the employer might be able to, and especially now where we're fairly hybrid for most places. And I just saw something, another major employer just was granting the ability to completely be remote for a lot of their work. I forget who it was. I just saw it. But some major employer just said, hey, we're going to allow everybody to be remote under certain circumstances. But for a lot of them, you're hybrid, which means maybe some of that care and that care opportunity isn't as stressed as it was. Though, depending on the job you're doing, and if you're the age of your kids, it might be a little crazy if you're trying to run meetings inside your house while they're running around too.
Well, and like you're saying here, the Family and Medical Leave Act. I mean, I think what you're seeing is that states and federal government are starting to realize that there is a real issue here. the care for children and care for the elderly has become a more chronic issue. I think what Massachusetts just put this Family Medical Leave Act in 2 years ago.
Right. Well, yeah, it kicked in officially, right.
Right. So I think that that's something that maybe even new that people don't even realize, well, can I use that? And how does that work?
Yeah.
So something to definitely look into.
Yeah, and actually there are companies that actually offer additional, whether it's child or actually senior care opportunities as well. So again, it's talk to the employer, see what your employer might have available. There are avenues and things to explore and ways that you can offset some of this. Like the worst thing, and Craig and I talk all the time about this, especially when money is trying to go it alone without, turning to somebody and asking for assistance or asking for help, because that's where we really, we tend to isolate ourselves and really get lost in it. And then, of course, it takes a village, right? There are other places that you can go, other family members. If you're a member of a church, maybe friends or other people that you work with, try to find, somebody who's in a similar situation, what they're doing or what they did or what they were able to do. One of the things that with having a healthy grandparent certainly around is that the opportunity to have them watch the child when instead of daycare or childcare expenses comes in, there's an offset there that you can certainly take advantage of.
Absolutely. And the other thing too, and sticking with the Greek Aries theme, is you don't have to be Atlas. You don't try to have to hold the whole world on your shoulders.
Right.
It's okay to delegate responsibilities to other people. It's okay to say, I need a break.
Yeah.
I need to take care of myself. It's okay to look for people outside of the family to help, like different services and nursing care and, child care. So don't feel like, I'm a terrible person or I'm not a good mother or a father because I'm not doing every little piece.
Right. Absolutely. And that comes right into the next one, which is, excuse me, caring for the caregiver, right? This whole notion of that the caregiver cares for everybody else. We talked about it earlier, but the idea here is almost taking that break or finding a way, right, Craig, to take that respite, right? To just say, wait a minute, this is getting too much. I need to step back, or I need to get a handle on this, for your own sort of both mental and physical well-being.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like trying to drive a car with no gas in it, right? You're not going to go very far. So if you don't take a little bit of time and recharge yourself, so you take care of yourself, you've got nothing left to give.
Right.
So even for those people who are givers who say, well, I don't need anything and I'm not worried about me, well, then, be the other way. If you really want to care about the people around you and you want to give them your best, well, then you've got to be at your best. So,
right. Yeah. And it is usually the caregiver who ends up getting that health concern, that health issue, that stress related, and it does happen. And like Craig said, it's because you're stretching yourself too thin. You're trying to give too much without, it's neglect. You end up neglecting some of the things that you should be doing to keep yourself healthy so you can keep doing what you want to do. And it really comes down to being all about balance, right? So, the family caregiver gets pulled in many different directions, and it's very difficult to balance the life, and especially when we start getting into stuff like, I'm trying to afford, whatever the cost of medication for, my dad or my mom, but at the same time, I want to put money away for the kids' college fund. Like, how do I figure out which one of those do I do? Oh, and the little Susie's got a soccer game, but I gotta get somebody over to the doctors. Like, all of these things come up and they pull us in different directions. And you really do have to sort of sometimes take a step back and prioritize, right? Prioritize what is in the best sense at some point for you to be balancing this, so you don't feel like you're just, pulled way too tight and way too taut on a wire.
Well, I mean, for the majority of us out there, Tom, like 99% of us, we have a finite amount of, financial resources, and a finite amount of, physical resources as far as, what we can give to people, time, energy, all those commitments. So
Right.
you're right. It's really about, what are the things that really need my time and attention, and what are just things that, people want my time and attention. So you can make sure you're giving it in the right places.
Yeah, and for a lot of this, there is some positive that comes from the sandwich generation. It's a closer family unit, right? A lot of times if you're moving mom and dad in, yes, we understand that if you're moving mom and dad in at the same time, Junior or little Susie move back into the house, it can feel a little chaotic and a little crazed. But there is that closeness. Like you realize, like, hey, I've got all of these people around me that I love, that love me, that we're able to do this and make it work. The problem is that when that happens, that the positive effects of being sandwiched can't be realized if you let the stress overpower your ability to handle it. And if you let it get away from you, that's where it starts to feel like, this is crazy. And then, as Craig said, you start to get into some of that, like almost, abhorrent, like I don't like this person, and the feeling of like, well, this is just going against me in so many different ways that you don't feel that love as part of it.
Build up resentment towards people you're caring for.
That's the word. See, I knew I was trying for something. That's why. The resentment. Thank you. Yes, that's what we were talking about. That feeling overwhelms everything and just takes away from any of the positive that can come from, because there is a positive to it, but you just got to see it, and you got to let yourself experience it, and you got to let yourself find the right place for it.
I think I used to watch this show. I think it was called The Waltons, right?
The Waltons, yeah, that's it.
Everybody living in one big house, and yeah.
John boy.
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Yeah. So the conclusion, right? Just every situation can be handled, right? That's one of the takeaways to have with it, is that not to let any one thing get too far, get too out of hand, get too far away from you. Clearly, as we've said, don't try to go it alone, right? Try to seek out other people, whether it's just somebody to talk to or somebody to confess to or somebody to vent on, right? That you have that can actually, have that conversation with. Absolutely take time for yourself, right? Be aware that you can be, what is that? Burning the candle at both ends. Is that what that cliche is, right? That you might be just stretching yourself too thin, which can be a negative and have impact and overall health concerns. And you got to have goals. I think we've said that enough, in terms of going through it. But a goal without a plan is just hope. So you have to put goals in place, but you got to put a plan and able to execute them, because otherwise it doesn't work. And what we try to do at Aries is try to help everybody have a clear vision of the road ahead, of where they want to get to. And one of the tools that we use that with, we just, Craig and I sort of adopted and started using this. So it's what we call the roadmap to financial awesomeness. And the roadmap is just that. It's just sort of a quick overview of where you are, where you should be, where you want to get to. And then we can have the conversation about the ins and outs and the whys and some of the emotion that goes along with that. You can always just type yes into the chat box. We're happy to have a conversation with you. We gave you the link before. Craig, I'm you dropping that link in.
Yeah, I just dropped it again, just in case anybody missed it.
Certainly appreciate that. This is Craig and I in our more formal attire. Yes, those are TB12 jerseys. He is coming back for one more season. We are very excited about that, because we get to keep our jerseys for one more year. And then we'll figure it out from there, what we're going to do, and whether it's Mac Jones or whoever ends up being the quarterback for the Patriots. But for now, we're going to keep the TB12 because he's the greatest of all time. I don't know if you have the webinar survey.
I don't have that. No.
Okay, never mind. It's all right. We'll get it out at some point. If we send out a recording, we'll do that. The link is not in the chat box. Thankfully, I didn't do that. All right. So keeping the think with a drink, what's on tap, what's coming up next week. We're on 331. We're going to do how to talk to your kids about money. And no, we're not talking about, even though, yes, some of it will be about 5 to 7 year olds, but we're talking about teenagers and young adults and how to talk to them about money. On 4.7, it's non-taxable retirement income, how to think about the strategies that can create that non-taxable retirement income. 4.14, because it's right before the final tax deadline, right? What to do with a tax refund. And then we've got a special one coming on the 21st. We are actually going to be joined by members of the Perkins School for the Blind and going over a tool that they have for employers to help them be a little bit more diversified and inclusive with the low vision or blind employees. So that's on the 21st.
And I just found the evaluation form. I dropped it in the chat box.
See, I knew you'd get it eventually. If I talked long enough, you'd figure it out.
Well, let's try to find the one form.
You can just go to the website. It's www.ariesfoundation.org, or you can email us. It's info@ariesfoundation.org. We do have a blog post as well that you can check out on various topics that go along with that. That's also on the website. Any questions in the chat box, Greg?
I have no questions in the chat box at this time.
All right, then I am going to stop my recording